Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-da. We're world building friendship and cultures today and asking, is God laughing at us?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the World Explorers podcast, where, as it is the first Sunday of the month, we will be doing our world building basics. And in this series, once a month, we come together and we take a topic based around world building in itself and just discuss like some tips, some ideas, some pros, some cons, just have a discussion about it. And seeing as this is November, and me and Isaac are Americans, November is the month of the turkey, also known as Thanksgiving, and it is a time when we're... What?
That is the greatest name of this holiday I've ever heard.
What?
Month of the Turkey.
It is, though. Am I wrong?
Nope, I love it.
Okay, cool. Anyway, threw me off track. So, seeing as it is Thanksgiving and it's about being grateful and spending times with friends and family, I thought a fun thing for us to be talking about is friendship.
Yay!
Do you see the sparkles?
Confetti.
I was thinking sparkles.
Sparkles.
Yes, friendship. With the chimes in the background and everything. I'm not editing that in though, so just use your imagination. But, so I thought we could talk about friendship and kind of how your relationships of characters in your story is greatly affected by the world you build and also can have a huge impact in how you world build. So, that's our topic. What do you think of it, Isaac?
I'm gonna need a little bit more on specifics of exactly what we're world building. So are you talking about, like, because usually the way people interact with each other stems from the world building itself, unless you were talking about culture specifically.
I think I'm talking more...
In which case...
Yeah, I'm talking more about culture.
In which case we're world building culture.
Yeah, but, like, friendship.
I mean, it sounds like... well, if you're world building friendship, it sounds like they are friends. But if you're saying there's something unique about this, generally, what that means is you're world building the culture.
So, there is kind of like, I guess culture is culture is that big arching theme for this video, but we are now taking a little subsection, because culture is big, and we could do many videos on it, and therefore I don't want to do a video on just culture. We're taking a little subsection from culture and friendships. So, I guess this could be considered, if you want to, we can broaden it to like relationships between people of different cultures, and how to world build that, like tension, so in which case we could talk about wars and peace treaties and politics. We can world build politics in this wonderful month of Thanksgiving. The one month where, please, can we just all get along? I internally died a little saying that. I'm sorry.
Okay, so where to start on this?
Wherever you like.
What?
Wherever you like.
Okay, so when it comes to world building a culture, a lot of the time what I like to do is say, I like to stem the culture from the rest of the world building. For example, let's say you are world building, and you have an area of your world where where all of the plant life is actually alive. Like, maybe they all have souls, but they do not speak or have faces or anything, but plants actually have souls, but they don't really do much. The people who live in this part of the world are going to be very careful where they tread and be very respectful towards life and nature.
Yeah.
Now, let's take another part of this same world. Over here, we have our mining town that doesn't care much about nature. All they care about is industrialization and digging holes in the ground.
Yeah,
now,
not political at all.
These two cultures stem from their environment. And you can also take these two types of cultures who are polar opposites but are in the same world, and you can have them clash and get a bunch of interesting scenarios out of this setup.
I know you want to like do
That's how
yeah. I mean,
that's how I stem. That's how I create cultures. Is it stems from the rest of the world building.
but another interesting way, like a different way on which you could build culture, is because it's also this is a versus like a again. It's kind of obvious when you listen to our world building series is that me and Isaac have two very different ways of writing. We start in different areas. So Isaac is our classic. He starts with the world building. He builds the world first. Well, I'm the type of person who builds the characters and relationships first. So you could tell that by the themes we pick for these different versions, and also kind of how we direct it. So while Isaac's suggestion is probably the easiest way, honestly, to do this is to start with the world and then build cultures afterwards. I tend to start with the relationship I want in my story and then adjust culture accordingly. So I will adapt my culture around like a relationship I want. So an example of this, I've talked about my City of Glass story a couple times in this, and in that one, it's a very monoculture, so it tends to be the story is based around just like one culture. But I developed that culture based on a relationship between two characters living in it. And that was just, I wanted this one character to teach this other character something, and him not being allowed to do it himself. And from that whole little idea and wanting that relationship, I stemmed an entire aspect of this culture and created this area, and then it expanded into like my entire world. And it was based off of just this one idea of relationship, which I'm not saying because it spoils my book, and I plan to actually write this thing and publish it, so I don't want to spoil it. But yeah, that it's this. If you were to read my story, you would know instantly what I was talking about. What relationship stemmed my entire world from it. So it's a weird way to world build, but it is a way to do it, and it is a way I have done.
Yeah, I'll say this real quick. There is no one way to write in
Agreed.
any area, whether you're talking about world building and magic systems, dialogue, characters, all of it. There is no one way to do writing. If it was only one set formulaic way of how to world build and write and everything perfectly, there would be no unique stories because we would all be using the same formulas.
In other words, then in which case writing wouldn't exist. Like, it only can exist because it exists in so many forms.
Yeah, it's not an equation. It's more like a big ball of wibbly wobbly world building stuff.
It's a soft magic system.
Yeah, it's basically a soft magic system.
Yeah.
Like, all of writing is a soft magic system.
Yep, there's some rules and stuff, but if you want, you can just throw them all out the window.
Yep.
But
That's a good way to sum up writing.
It's a soft magic system. Voila, look at us being clever. So some things that I have some points which we can kind of like dive into to kind of keep our podcast somewhat contained, which I know is impossible, but I'll try anyways. So one thing that I thought could be kind of fun is to talk about like a multicultural friendship group versus a monoculture. So how does that affect your writing or how you go about world building when you're focusing on a single culture and like their relationship versus like a bunch of cultures interacting and you have a friend group that's got people from all over?
So you're saying we're focusing on one friend group with multiple cultures blending in together, and we're trying to world build all of the cultures that these people are from?
Yeah, or like what changes? I'm asking you a question, Isaac. What do you do differently? Or do you even do anything differently if your story is focused on a character from one culture or a character group, like a bunch of people in one culture, versus a character group with a lot of cultures involved? Like, does your writing system change at all?
Okay, I have only ever written in two different ways in regards to culture. One was I just made one culture where everybody was the same culture, and that culture was the default, our real world culture. That
Yeah.
book was terrible and will never see the light of day.
There.
New book that I'm working on, I actually do have multiple cultures, and all of the different characters are from different cultures, and they all clash with each other in different ways. Some are similar to each other, and those two types of characters with similar cultures can get along really well, but then they can have a problem with this other character who's polar opposite. My main character, for example, is actually he has the most extreme and different culture than the rest of the characters. And in short, I will say what it does is it causes most of the other main characters to actually fear him.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, I won't go too far into it because I don't want to give
Again,
away
yeah.
all of my story and world building stuff. But yeah, they all interact in different ways because of the different cultures they are from. And one of the ways that you can world build, one of the ways I'm world building the cultures is you get a small taste of the character, and their culture, and you'll say, oh, this character is unique in this way, and then you go to where this person is from, and you're like, oh, everybody here is like this, except for maybe everybody here is like this, but they're even more so. Like this one character has a very refined way of speaking. Then you go to and you're like, well, that's kind of strange. You go to their culture, and they're actually where they're from. They're actually considered to be one of the most slurish of their people
Yeah.
because they don't have a refined enough way of speaking.
Yeah, see, that's kind of my point that I really ultimately wanted to get to in this video was, if you're struggling with culture and building up culture, a huge piece of advice, and it's an advice that my writing professor gave me when I was struggling with world building, because world building has always been my weak point, and he recognized that and said, you know what? Take your character and make a culture based off of your character instead of characters based around a culture. Try switching it up. Like, so what Isaac was saying was like, he had this character and suddenly he was building the character's background based off of traits he wanted that character to have. He was building the culture based. It's kind of weird to think that we're building entire cultures based off of one person, and because that's not how the world works, and we should acknowledge that right now. This is not the world. That is a bad way to view the world. But in writing, it's really helpful to build cultures just around traits you kind of want your characters to have. Or not have, I guess, too. So if you want your character to have a strong opinion on something, that opinion can then reflect on the culture they lived in, and you realize, oh yeah, that culture, that's like a strong opinion held by that culture, and then you get other opinions and other ideas, and then suddenly you're into world building, but it stemmed from one character. So kind of scale down. If you're struggling with the big picture, it's okay to start small with like one person and then expand from that, and then just make sure at some point you start adding diversity into a culture, or else it's kind of sad.
Don't make it a planet of hats. That's the trope you want to avoid, is the planet of hats. Where there's this trope in writing where what you do is you will create a culture, or multiple cultures, and they will all be defined by one characteristic or one hat. For example, in this culture, they're all a bunch of grumpy pants, and that's the entire culture. Oh, look at this one. Look at all of the elves. Their culture is they're fancy. Okay, now let's go on to the next one. This culture for orcs, their culture is they're disgusting. And that's as far as their culture goes. Like, that's what you call the planet of hats. You want to avoid that.
Yeah, you want
to have multiple layers to the culture. And very often you can see how the character that you're using clashes with the status quo of that culture.
And I think another thing is that your character is a result of your culture, but a culture isn't just a culture. A culture is the individual. And I think a lot of the times we like to look at culture as this whole, as this one thing as the set. But that's not what a culture is. It's not like that in our world, in the real world. It's not like that in a story either. Cultures are thousands of individuals, each one with unique perspectives, ideas, beliefs, and yeah, together they create this culture. But at the same time, when you dive deep into either this one character you're making or this one little group or something, you gotta keep in mind that, like, every person you introduce, every character you introduce, is an individual. And if you're introducing a bunch of characters and they all feel like the same, then you know your culture needs help. And that you're not building a culture at that point. Because culture is the individual more. It's weird because we always say culture's the big people, but no, it's the individual that makes a culture. Yeah.
Real quick, I want to say we just recorded a video on Moon's channel, which or Casey's channel, which is about the new My Little Pony New Generation movie, and there's a lot of criticism in that in that video. That was not our original plan, but here's something positive about it. The culture of the unicorns, the first unicorn that we see is a very bouncy, bubbly, hyperactive, always smiling character. We then go and see where the unicorns live, and everyone there is just depressed. Like, this is where you can have a character. This is an example of a character clashing with the culture that this character stems from.
But if we want to go back to the negatives of that movie, My Little Pony was very much a movie where you had a few characters that stood out, but then everyone else felt like the exact same character.
Yeah,
like all the other unicorns were blobs.
Well, not all of them. Like Alpha Fiddle.
There were two that weren't.
Definitely was not.
There were two. Two.
Yeah, but they were mostly blobs.
And then literally there's a song about how all the Earth ponies are like all the same and will hive mind if you want them to.
Yeah, the culture, they did have a little bit of a Planet of Hats thing going.
It wasn't bad though.
This is what I'm saying. That was bad. It wasn't super bad, but it wasn't really great
either. It could
have
been better. But at the same time, I get where you're
I'm talking about the clashing. I'm talking about specifically the characters stemming from and clashing with the culture that they come from, and seeing how this person coming from this culture interacts with others from different cultures. Like Sunny, who is clashing with her home culture, interacting with Izzy from a culture that her culture is supposed to hate. That was hard to follow.
Yeah, I watched the movie, so if you didn't
watch the movie, so you can follow it.
If you didn't watch the movie, I'm sure you're completely So maybe we should.
Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. So what would your thoughts? What are your thoughts on building like a world with a single culture?
I'd say that if you're trying to build a single culture in a world, this is generally done one of two ways. One is the culture is literally the culture that the writer comes from. Whatever the writer's culture is, that's the culture that is the default, and it ends up in the story. It's the one that all the audience can relate to, understand, because it's the culture that the audience likely comes from as well. However, you can world build your own unique culture, and it be the only culture. But generally, if you're doing that, that means that there's no other far-off locations or isolated locations that you're going to go journeying to. Everything is just sort of one kingdom. And if you're trying to... And this culture will likely be the same as yours, but maybe with a few minor additions or tweaks. Or it could even be based off of another real-life culture. I actually want to bring this up because another way of world building is to bring in real-life cultures and then base some stuff off of a real-world culture and put it into the book. This, and you could get a whole bunch of weird stuff that might seem off to the reader and be like, this is a strange thing for the culture, but to the people in the story, it's totally normal.
Yeah.
And you can get your own single culture with these unique things about them, even if there's no other cultures to compare them to.
Yeah, because I know the story I'm working on, it's a monoculture, so that means it's a singular culture. There are other cultures, like in the distance, which I hope to explore one day, but my story will never touch on them. Like, it stays in the singular culture I'm developing, and they don't really interact with the other cultures ever. So I would consider my story a monoculture.
Yeah, let me ask you a question real quick. Do you believe that the culture of our world, or like of America, is really going to be the same in 500 years?
No.
Yeah, it's not. It's
No.
going to be hardly recognizable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing where, if you, let's say you were writing a book that was set in the future, or sci-fi, and now you've got a totally different setting. Again, this is where you take the world building and you stem the culture from that world building. What kind of impact would this world have on the culture? And then you can get get a whole bunch of really fun and interesting scenarios that you wouldn't normally have in the real world, because things like laser guns do not exist.
Yeah.
That's not really something that would probably affect culture much, but okay, how about this? Anti-gravity basketball. There you go, a fun game. How would that interact the culture? Because you've introduced the ability of anti-gravity into this world.
Yeah. And I always love the idea of like taking inspiration from around you, from other stories, from other culture. And also, this is like a good call to like educate yourself. Go learn about some other cultures, go experience them, try their foods, interact with people from those cultures respectfully. Okay, we respect other cultures here. And there is I know that for a lot of people there is a huge fear about writing about cultures that aren't your own. And I am totally with you. That is a terrifying thought when you're basing it off of a real world culture that's not your own culture, because people are mean. So.
Alright, can I say something real quick on that?
Yeah.
So, if you are basing it off of a real life existing culture, depending on how much you are taking from that culture and putting into your story, will depend on how careful you need to be, or even consider using it at all. For example, let's say that you liked this one little tidbit of religion from a certain culture, and you say, oh, that's an interesting idea, I'm going to put it into my book, maybe change a few minor things, that you don't really need to walk on eggshells with.
Yeah.
That's not a big deal. It's like, no one's going to care, and they'll be like, oh, this is similar to my culture, but there are one little similarity, but it's not like they're trying to offend me or anything. However, if you take something like Christianity, Judaism, Catholicism, and you put it into your story, and then start twisting a few things about it, like take a few, if you change up how God works, or change up how the devil works, or something.
Be careful.
Change up the history of it. Suddenly, you're walking on eggshells, and you got to be careful about what you're writing. And generally, unless you belong to that culture or religion or society or whatever, you want to not use that kind of stuff in your writing. You can, but again, just be careful and maybe have somebody proofread it for you, just to make sure you're not being offensive.
Yeah, there's a lot of, especially in culture building, of write what you know. I know it sounds boring, it sounds limiting, but the truth is you know a lot more than you think, and especially if you're writing fiction stuff, you have a lot more leeway, like space to work in, than you probably think you do. I'm trying to think of a good example of that would be, it's Cassandra Clare's has her series. They're like demon hunters and stuff like that, and Christianity's a part of the story, like it's a small part, but like it's based in the real world, so there's a lot of real world cultural stuff going on. Or even Marvel has a ton. Marvel might be a better example, actually. Let's go to Marvel, which people will probably know more of. Marvel, with things like Black Panther and that whole cultural idea of representing a different culture. We're not gonna lie, most of the people in that culture who worked on that show weren't part of that culture. And by that, I'm pretty sure all of them. Like, none of them were part of African tribal culture. And yet, they were able to do it extremely well based off a lot of research, talking with people who were part of it, and just respecting the culture. It's amazing how much respect will get you in a series.
You also got to keep in mind, while Wakanda was based off of African culture, it's also a fictional country, and therefore you get a little bit of leeway with that. Yeah. It takes place in it still takes place in the same continent, with some of the same culture bleeding in because they share a continent, but because it's its own hidden country, with its own. Again, this is where some of the culture can stem from the world building, where they don't want to share their resources with the rest of the world. They still have their own unique culture, and it's not offending anyone.
Yeah.
Or at least not that I know of. I have not heard anybody complain about it.
I haven't either. Honestly, Black Panther is like one of the best Marvel movies, just in general, in how just well executed it was. Another one that came up was the newest one. The Ten Rings is another interesting one with culture and stuff and separate. That one's probably even more embedded in culture than even Wakanda is, and how they did it. And I would say they probably didn't do it as well, especially considering there was a lot of American culture put in just because of circumstances in the movie. But it is something that can be done, and I feel like both movies are good examples that if you're sitting there like scared that you're gonna mess up a culture or offend someone, for one, if you think something might offend someone, then it probably will, and don't do it. But two, it's just being on it. But two, have more confidence in yourself and more faith in the world, and the idea. And just remember, like, you're writing fiction. You're not writing real. If you're writing historical fiction, that's a whole different topic, and that's very different. But you're writing fiction. You have a lot more freedom. And don't try to offend people, but at the same time, create your cultures and your worlds, and remember that they're yours at the end of the day. This culture may be heavily influenced by these other things, but they're not these other things. It's your world that you created, and if you own it, then, I don't know, I feel like people shouldn't be criticizing other worlds when it's not their world, it's this person's world who made it.
Nothing to add on to that. Good job.
Thank you. I feel like these episodes, like these are about, like, they start out with us talking about some actual tips, but then at the end we just turn into motivational speakers, and they're just saying there like, you can do it. You can. This is your world. You can reach for the stars if you want to. You can change the world in your story if you. Yeah. It's just.
You're the writer. You can do literally anything. Doesn't mean that what you're going to do is good, but
you can still do it. You
can still experiment.
Yeah. But I do feel like there's a lot of motivation in writing. People don't think about it, but it's a very empowering thing. It's like art in general is very empowering because you're creating something that's yours. For me personally, it makes me feel really close to God and stuff because he's the creator of the universe and everything else, and here I am creating my own little world, and I feel like I get a taste of being close to him. So, it's very empowering for me to write stories, and especially do this podcast and stuff where we come up with really weird, crazy ones, or we get to talk about our tips and our ideas and thoughts and stuff, and I don't know, I always feel good after the podcast. Like, it's a good morale boost, especially considering we do it in the middle of the week, and I need it so much.
You say that. Funny enough, I was talking to my mom one time about how I was rewriting how the world works, and just making it so that everything functions totally differently, and everything runs off of magic rather than science.
Yeah.
And she was listening to me talking about how I'm rebuilding the world, and she's sort of like subtly sounded like she was complaining, saying that God already did it perfect on the first try.
Yeah, see, I don't really understand. He did. Yeah, fair. But at the same...
Yeah, he did, but that doesn't mean I can't have my fun and go and build my own world that he didn't.
Yeah, and at the same time, God still kind of did, because he created you, and you're creating this world, and therefore he's still the author.
He gave me an imagination to go and build my own version of his world.
Yeah, he loves that. I feel like God has the biggest library in the world, and he's just reading his creation's work and just brimming with a bit of concern, a lot of concern for some of it, but also like this pride that, you know what, here's my creation, and they're also creating, and you know, there's a connection there when you get to create with your creation. Like that's cool.
Sure, he's looking down at us saying, I'm so proud when we go and we create things like that mountain world. But then he's going and looking down at me and with a scowl as I talk about narwhals throwing potatoes.
I was thinking more of the emus eating the evil chef and all that. I was just like, yeah. Look, we all have our moments. But yeah,
I'm very disappointed in you. Like, I gave you a brain and an imagination. You come up with this nonsense.
I think he's laughing along with us. Personally, I think he's laughing with us. Hopefully. Probably. Or at us.
I hope he is.
Oh, but we got really off topic, but at the same time, that's kind of that's where we are with culture and like friendships and stuff like that. And the power, it's the turn from the power of friendship to the power of writing. It's powerful, guys. You don't understand how powerful writing is until you actually start doing it, and then you're like, yeah, you know what? I can do some stuff with this.
Yeah, this started off as a thing about friendship, then it transitioned into culture, and then it transitioned into, is God laughing with us?
That is our podcast in a nutshell there. Just the weird arc, like we start with friendship and somehow we get to, is God laughing at us? And you're like, so how we get there? And people will make guesses, and it's like, no, actually we went this way and then down, and then we turned the left there and the right, and we ended up in the same place, but then we yeah. But I think I'm happy with this our little spiel. Next week we'll be returning to our normal prompts, our normal episodes. If you don't know what those type are, that's pretty much where Isaac provides us with a little prompt, and then we build an entire world based around that prompt. And yes, Isaac will get next week. I took 2 weeks in a row. This never happens, but Isaac gets the next week, and the next one, and the next one for who knows how long. So, but hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you feel empowered afterwards. I feel empowered. How about you, Isaac? You feeling empowered?
I feel like recommending people go and listen to a Brandon Sanderson lecture on world building cultures, because he does a fantastic job.
Way better than we ever could. We rant too much.
Oh, yeah, he is like just the best.
Isaac loves this guy. It's a little concerning, honestly.
Have you listened to him?
Anyways, that's all the time we have for today.
You don't know why. If you would listen to him, you'd understand why I love this guy. Like,
okay. Before this just becomes a thing of us gushing over a guy I don't even know. We're going to end it here. We'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody. I've got